It's my pleasure to talk with Ivan Krastev within the frame of a project the Center for Liberal Strategies is working on. It is a European project studying the social contracts in Europe. I have a few questions on the occasion of May 9th, the Day of Europe. And they are around the questions with regard to the European social contract. But I will start a bit further from the European social contract, and I will ask you your opinion on a common theme shared by many political analysts who argue that Europe and the world are caught in a series of overlapping crises, polycrisis, that are presenting an existential threat to the post-World War II and post-Cold War consensus, that liberal democracies are the preferable political regimes. Do you share this alarmist view that the polycrisis are an existential threat to this consensus, or you think that there is still hope for liberal democracies in Europe and beyond?
First, I believe that there is still hope, because we don't know how the future is going to look like. So only very kind of root determinists are going to believe that there is no hope. But what is interesting about the concept of the polycrisis, by the way, the concept comes 1970s. Adam Tusri introduced it now, but it has two totally different dimensions. One is that we have an overlap of crises, and the sum of them is much bigger than just kind of the effect of each of them taken together. But the second, which I found much more interesting, is that since 1970s, where the idea of the polycrisis has emerged, was that back then you can believe that there is one solution that can solve all of them together. For example, in a classical Marxist discourse, the end of capitalism is solving all the problems, all the crises. And now the story with this crisis is that quite often the solution of one of the crises is basically contributing to the deepening of the other. And I believe this is a principally new situation. It is difficult because it cannot be, there is not this kind of a silver line which is going to allow us to say, if we're going to do this, the climate crisis is going to be solved and the migration crisis is going to be solved. But to be honest, one of the problems is that for politicians who are very much trained in this idea of one solution to everything, they're trying to basically sell the solution of one crisis as the solution of the others. You're going to see how, when we're talking, for example, about green policies, we're saying that also this is going to be reindustrialization and this can reduce migration and so on. Or when we're talking now about defense policies, the same. We should try to basically accept the reality that there are different crises. Probably some of them are not going to be so much solved than contained or outlived. So how to live with the crisis without allowing this crisis to destroy the European project, at least for me, is much more the sense and the meaning of politics today than a kind of a classical solution.
Yeah, there is no single cause for all the crises, and there is no single silver bullet that will solve them.
At least in my reading now.
Yeah. And we'll come to the possible remedies, of course, and identifying the sources of the instability. But I'd like first to ask you about the social contracts in Europe. We are studying the social contracts at the nation state level, but we are also studying whether we can speak of a social contract at the European level. So what is your take? Do you believe that there is a social contract in Europe beyond the nation state? Can we speak of such thing? And if not, what is the basis of legitimacy of politics beyond the nation state?
I really believe that there is a major kind of a dramatic transformation of politics, and I'm going to give you the concrete example how I understand where the problem lies on from this perspective of the social contract. because it's a contract between whom and whom. So let's imagine a country. Let's imagine Bulgaria in 20 years. We have a major labor shortage, regardless of what we talk. I'm sure that there are going to be more foreigners working in Bulgaria than they're working now. At the same time, you have a lot of Bulgarians who are working and living outside of Bulgaria, but they're living within the European Union. And then you have basically a growing number of people who are aging and are entering retirement age. So then imagine a political community, electoral body that looks like this. 15-20% of the people who are on the labor market do not have voting rights because of the fact that many of these people are coming either transitory through the country or they're coming from another EU member state. There is not a pressure on the society to give voting rights to these people when it comes to the national level. For example, in place like Vienna now, 40% of the people living there cannot, and working there, cannot vote on the Austrian national elections. And then you have 15% of Bulgarians who are living outside of the country. So they can vote, but they're not paying taxes. And they're not going to pay taxes, but they're going to vote, and their vote can decide what are going to be the taxes. And then you have these retired people who are basically not on the labor market at all. So then the very concept of no taxation, no taxation without representation is becoming a joke. And I do believe that this kind of a change is not captured neither on the level of national politics nor on the level of European politics. European politics is much more contract between the nation states, but taking into account that it's a contract based on the idea of the equal rights of the citizens regardless of where they are living. But it is very much a contract between states. On the national level, we start to have a difference of national contracts, but these contracts are based in the absence of the national economy. There is no.
And very fluid,
there is no,
very fluid demos.
And there is a very fluid demos. People are moving, people are living, and also using the classical Hirschmanian terms, the exit is so low cost. It's so easy basically to change the place if you don't like where you're living or working. It's so less emotional kind of a cost for this, that the very idea of loyalty that was so central for Hirschman is now difficult to define. And this is on the level of the family, this is on the level of the state, this is on the level of the unity. I do believe that all this is changing the nature of politics. This is changing the nature of political identities, and this is even changing the level of disappointments. When we say that people are disappointed with the liberal democracy, and this is a question being asked to me, with Bulgarian passport, living in Vienna, working in other places, so with what I'm exactly disappointed? With the Bulgarian liberal democracy, with the Austrian liberal democracy, with the democracy on the level of European Union, with the liberal democracy in the world, because like every intelligent person, I'm reading quite a lot of American media, and also probably I'm not very happy. So strangely enough, particularly when it comes to the social contract, our understanding of how society works and not, it's very difficult to be precise because we don't know who is in contract with whom about what.
Yeah. So do you then think that this framework, the social contract framework, is exhausted? And if yes, what do you think could take its place as a legitimation base?
It's difficult, and I do believe that probably it's exhausted. I don't see a very easy alternative to this. And this is why this type of input-output legitimacy is so important. But again, even the idea of the input and output are not so clear anymore in the story that I was telling. Because even
Who has the
right
to an input and who is affected by the output.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is creating this strange story of fluidity. And this also goes on a cultural level to something that Olivier Roy might quite importantly touch on his book, The Crisis of Culture, because every social contract is also basically rooted in a certain culture, which means shared idea of the obvious, what is self-evident. It is not based in all these early constitutions, at least the American idea of the self-evident is so important. So exactly because you don't know who lives in your state anymore, Nothing can be taken for granted. You cannot be sure what the other person is going to understand, and this is why you end up with something that he calls aggressive normativity, exactly because everything should be explained. For him, the idea of the national culture is like the problem of the native language. You're speaking it before you're learning it. Now we all are basically
Implied
forced
knowledge.
to learn the language before speaking it in order to be sure that the other person is going to understand exactly what you mean. But exactly because of this very normative contractual nature, you start to lose the sense of home. So, because home is exactly where intuitively you believe that you know what is right and what is wrong, you have the feeling that you can say certain things and you're going to be got right, even when probably you're not going to define it good. And this sense of confusion that we see in my view is very much about this. And this is why, on one level, they're going to be pressured for even more contractual stuff. To make it much more clear, much more legal, so
To set
basically to
some,
define everything
yeah,
on rights.
borders.
But paradoxically, the more rights and well-defined rights the people are going to have, the less they're going to feel at home. And I do believe politically this is something that is really difficult to reconcile, and this is part of the characteristics of the modern situation. And of course, this is crisis, but the positive news is that the discourse of democracy was always discourse on crisis.
Yeah.
Democracy always talks about itself as being a crisis. It does not have any other language.
It is constantly reconstructing
Yeah,
itself through a
absolutely.
crisis.
Absolutely.
So probably the last question at this point would be on resilience and sources of resilience of the, if not the social contract at the European level, if we agree that we can hardly speak of social contract there, at least the resilience of the European democracy. What are the sources of such resilience? Do you see such sources?
Listen,
Where?
the most important source of legitimacy of any political construct is that it is surviving for a long time. Every crisis overcome, not resolved, but overcome, is a source of
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
yeah, in a certain way, the most legitimate thing is the one that you are not kind of asking questions about. And in a certain way, one of the reasons that, for example, many empires have been survived for a long time is that they have been taken as natural. I do believe that for most societies, regardless of the fact that they are happy with democracy, democracy is perceived as natural state of society. This is at least part of view of modernity. The liberal part of it is going to be much more contested because also this can be defined much more differently. And of course, I'm not excluding at all that there could be a nationalistic mobilization if there's going to be a crisis in the European project, because nationalism is also rooted on a certain idea of solidarity which is not contractual.
Nationalist social contract.
Yeah. It is very much not a contract between basically citizens who are living now, but it's a contract, as Burke is going to say, between our ancestors and our children. It's an intergenerational contract. And this intergenerational contract, by the way, is also very much under questions because we cannot be sure that the children of tomorrow are going to be our children. But nevertheless, it gives you a certain level of organic strengths, which when it comes to resilience is important. The other source of resilience, in my view, is that
this is a very conservative understanding of the social contract and the sources of resilience.
But it's important because in a way, in the moment of crisis, different intuitions, some very conservative and some very future-oriented, go together. The problem of resilience is that you're using every resources you have.
Yeah.
From this point of view, and this problem, my last point, resilience is eclectic. Unlike many other things, resilience is eclectic by definition. It's ideologically eclectic. It's eclectic on the level of the political practices and performances. So the art of survival is not architectural.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
Whatever works.
Whatever works.
Whatever works. Thank you, Ivan, for this
Thank you
talk.
for the question.